So now I'd like to get into some of those tips that I can give from my perspective from working in different types of remote settings and especially the one that I'm currently working in. And before I dive into those, one concept that I want to sort of outline real quick is the difference between synchronous communication and asynchronous communication. This is sort of at the core of what we do at Doist, which is we communicate asynchronously. Not every remote team does, and it's not to say that it's the only way to communicate, but if I'm expressing kind of how we're communicating at Doist and the advice that I would give, it would be to incorporate at least some level of more asynchronous communication. So what that means, basically, if we boil it down, is just that you don't expect immediate responses. If you think about a team spread out across all different time zones, different corners of the world, different work schedules, different holiday schedules, it can be very difficult to work in an environment where you're expecting immediate responses. If I send something to you and I expect immediate response, I might spend my whole day waiting on a response from you that may never come. That could be bad for culture, it could be bad for relationships with coworkers, it's certainly bad for work and efficiency. So what we do is we promote a culture that's based around asynchronous communication, and that means that we don't expect immediate responses. There's sort of an internal rule that, my coworkers will reply within 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, and that doesn't always mean that they need that much time. Sometimes the responses are instant. But if we all have the same expectation and we say, okay, I don't need a response to keep continuing with my work, then it allows all of us to kind of be on the same playing field, understand where we're coming from, and not put pressure on each other to respond immediately. There are tons of benefits to this. I'll get into those in just a second, but I wanted to explain the concept between synchronous communication and asynchronous communication, just in case that wasn't clear already. So first, let me start with a couple of the don'ts. And those would be some of the tips that we would say, try not to incorporate these practices into what you're doing every day. The first one that I'll start with is try to avoid the urge to depend completely on email. Email is a great tool. It's the lifeblood of almost every company out there, and it's going to be necessary for almost any business. However, if you're using email as your internal source of communication and really only solely relying on it, it can be very messy in a remote setting. Emails promote 2 or 3 people maybe working together in silos. And when you have people spread out all over different time zones and different parts of the world, it can be really hard to get that information out of silos at times. It also makes conversations very choppy. It's hard to read things that are flowing. And when you keep in mind that you really don't have very much face-to-face communication anymore in a remote setting, you can see how reading through emails all day, every day for every little bit of communication could become a pretty big headache. The second thing I want to advise against is trying to rely too much on chat. Chat is basically a tool designed for one line at a time, instant communication. And that kind of goes against the asynchronous philosophy that we laid out a little bit ago. If you're communicating completely with chat, then you're constantly living one line at a time. You're expecting immediate responses. Teammates might find that things are buried from one piece of context to the next. And it just gets very difficult to kind of keep ideas flowing, keep them sort of in one place where you can all find them later. So again, we try to avoid email, we try to avoid instant chat, and we also try to avoid a lot of meetings. It can be very, very tempting to fall back on meetings. And meetings are great, they serve a purpose, but if you're now suddenly working in a remote setting where meetings can kind of take the place of that face-to-face interaction that you used to have, you'll find that people are really apprehensive to try to join those meetings, especially at all hours of the night or morning. It can be hard to line them up with coworkers who have different schedules. And also, we find that often they're pretty inefficient, especially in a remote setting. So we try not to rely on meetings. It again comes back to the asynchronous mindset. That would be a very synchronous thing to do, where we're all in one room, all expecting immediate responses, discussing the same topic. It leads to a lot of wasted time and inefficiency. So we try to avoid those things. Okay, so we've talked about some of the don'ts, and now we're going to talk about some of the do's, or the things that we would really try to promote and we try to utilize here at Doist. So the first, as I've mentioned, is we really try to take on a very asynchronous way of communicating together. That means we're not expecting the immediate responses. We are allowing our teammates plenty of time to respond, to think their thoughts through, and then to put their ideas back out to the team when they have them. And when it works best for them. This means people can disconnect, they can go kind of get into what we call deep work mode, separate themselves from just communicating and chatting and working more on what's really important to their core work. Then they can return and communicate with the team and without feeling that pressure to respond right away. This is really at the core of the way that we communicate as a team, and it works really, really well for us. The second thing is we want to promote transparency as much as possible. So regardless of what tools you decide to use or the type of culture that the company has, in a remote setting, transparency is key. You need everybody to kind of be able to peer into the conversations that are happening as a company and then be able to step back and not be attached to it at all times. But if things are transparent, then you'll find that people that are in outlying time zones who maybe aren't working when the core of the team's working, or people who maybe aren't always involved in some of the more important conversations in the company, when they have something to say, they feel okay chiming in. This is all super important in a remote setting because you don't have everybody in one place. You can't get everybody into an office room or a conference room and hash things out. You need transparency to allow people to feel like they have a voice. So, for instance, email is like the opposite of transparent. If you're emailing between 2 or 3 people, there's really no transparency for the rest of the team. Other tools provide you a space to do this in one place and allow everybody to participate. So having that open kind of culture and tools that promote that type of culture are super important for your communication style in a remote setting. Something else we really focus on is this concept of mindfulness. So mindfulness is really just being aware of your teammates' energy, being aware of your teammates' ability to take on more work, and trying to reduce the noise and distractions as much as possible. So in everything that we do, we really try to say, how can I limit the number of people I'm notifying, for instance? If I'm communicating with 10 people on a team and we're having a conversation back and forth, and then I realize, really this conversation's just between 2 of us now. How can I keep one notification out of those other people's inboxes and just start that communication with the one other person that I really need to talk with? We're always thinking about this. We're always trying to cut down on spam, as we call it internally, like cut down on those extra emails, extra notifications, anything that needs to go out. That could be like as simple as replying with a reaction, like a thumbs up, as opposed to saying, okay, great, that's one less notification that everybody gets. So if we try to incorporate this mindfulness idea that, let's save everybody's time and energy as much as possible and everything that we do, then it really grows exponentially, and it's great for the whole team's energy levels, it's great for everybody's efficiency, and it just cuts down on some of that outside noise that really isn't necessary. And the last little thing I'll point out is to try to have fun and remember that you're humans, we don't need to be robots in terms of how we communicate. We don't have to abide by all these rules 24/7. Incorporate some ways to have a little bit of fun, to make sure that people still feel like they can have that chat like they might have at a water cooler or in the break room in a traditional setting. Keep in mind that people really crave this, and if you go too far in one direction where you're really focused on, just on efficiency and productivity and kind of keeping this style secure, then you may find that people aren't really, communicating on a fun level and enjoying themselves. So try to incorporate that into the way that the team is building the communication style.